I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, June 11th, 2024 City Council discussion only meeting of the City Council. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Altman.
Here.
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh.
Here.
Mayor Brookover.
Here. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved. Second.
I missed that one. Moved by Meadows, supported by Watson.
Yep.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next on the agenda is communication from the audience. I have several slips tonight. Patrick Rose.
Hello, my name is Patrick Rose. At this point, I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people about our Fair Housing Charter Amendment. I have to tell you, regardless of people's political background, we get the same response. They want to live in a city where the rules protect the basic freedom of association of citizens to choose who lives in their home with them, as long as they do not pay rent. A charter is like a constitution. That is where you protect basic rights, like freedom of association. There is a consensus that politicians should not decide who should live with us, like having a live-in summer nanny, or deciding to have a couple as live-in housekeepers who pay no rent. People who want their daughter's best friend, or to want to host a best friend with her child who've lost their home and have nowhere else to live. East Lansing homeowners do not want relationships to be policed by the city code if their guests pay no rent. They do not want large fines for engaging in basic protected conduct we all take for granted as our inheritance. They grab my clipboard, they sign to protect their right to choose, and then they thank me profusely. Last time I was here, I explained what the first paragraph in our amendment is about, and every person who signs reads it before they talk to me. I'm going to read it again. The city shall not restrict in any way relationships of persons living together as a household or residing in the home, or interfere with the rights of owners to live with persons of their choice, as long as such persons are not rent-paying guests. And each of these three clauses are separated by a comma. The two main ideas are modified by the last clause because of the two commas. Unfortunately, this language has been misconstrued to mean something it does not say or mean. Attorney Kathy Swedlow, who's married to Councilmember Eric Altman, gave the Housing Commission an FAQ document that said that our first paragraph guts and dismantles the entire rental housing regulation scheme. The reason for her misunderstanding is that she based her analysis on removing the second comma in our first paragraph. Go look at the website, the Housing Commission has it up. It's not correct. When the second comma is not there, the meaning is ambiguous. Under Kathy's change in our public punctuation, removing the second comma, she has made the first clause stand alone as if there were a period at the end of the first clause. She accidentally is rewriting the first paragraph so it reads, the city shall not restrict in any way relationships of persons living together as a household or residing in the home, period. That's how she's reading it. If one read that first clause as if it ends with a period, then it does restrict the city's power to license rent-paying tenants. But that's not what our proposal says. It's not our intent. Our proposal says the city shall not restrict in any way relationships of persons living together as a household or residing in the home, as long as such persons are not rent-paying tenants. This keeps current rental license regulations, it keeps overlay districts, and most importantly of all, it keeps the 1996 ban on converting single-family homes to group house rentals, and it allows the city to adopt short-term rental or regulations, which many people support, not inconsistent with our amendment. Just a very, very few people do not sign our proposal, and when they don't, they say they've heard our amendment will gut city rental regulations. Mark Meadows on the council has said that, and Eric Altman has as well. But that is based on a mistake. They deleted the last clause, Kathy Swedlow deleted the last comma, but voters see the full sentence just as we wrote it. People who read the actual language see the simple mistake that's being made by removing the second comma or deleting the last clause. We now have corrected the mistake in people's minds by having them read the actual language, which voters will read and courts will enforce as written. I hope we've cleared that up. I hope we can now move on. And we urge you to adopt our amendment language and stop restricting relationships without giving notice to people
30 seconds remaining.
of the law that bans them from having people they have a right to have in their house, and eliminate large retroactive fines. The code does not require notice, and the two cases I read indicated notice has not been given by the city, which alone is reason to adopt the amendment. With our language, people can be secure in their homes, tranquil in their neighborhoods, and fully enforce all existing rental laws, which we strongly encourage. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Sherry Rose?
Hi there, my name's Sherry, and my job I view as giving you reports from the field. Again, a little qualitative research based on talking with people, so I hope you can learn from what I've been learning from. This past week, I encountered somebody who was from the Bailey neighborhood who has long experience with living in an overlay district, and they said to me, I'm getting kind of confused because I've always thought that I can't have a long-term guest in my home with my family in this overlay district because I can't get a rental license even if they don't pay rent. And she said, this is a very educated person, and she said, I went to the city's website and I looked in the FAQs, and this is what I read. She said, my sibling and I buy a house, and we each want our children to live there together. So she said, okay, what does this mean? This is an FAQ. Do I need a rental license for that? And the web page says, let's see, you all have been now becoming students of this. Does it need a rental license? Any hands? I'm a teacher. I like to engage. Okay, so it says, no, you would not need a rental license for this, period. One of you could have your children live there, but not both of you. So I asked, actually, Annette, and she said, that is a little unclear, because I wasn't sure what it meant when I asked her about it. And she told me that this is just about the children living in the home, not the whole family with the siblings. So it's just the children. It doesn't say how many children. It just says we want our children to live there together. And the answer would be, one of you can have your children. It doesn't matter how many. It doesn't say this could be a domestic unit. It just says one of you can have your children live there, but not both of you. Doesn't matter if it's 2 children, 1 child, 3 children. Doesn't say. Doesn't say one of those children could be a long-term guest. This is FAQ number 9 for anyone who wants to look it up. So more confusion, again, so some of the analysis on Kathy's FAQs that are posted on the Housing Commission are similar in nature to this one of which says, I don't live in East Lansing, but I own a home there, and my child and her friend want to live in their house. That kind of parallels the cousins living in the house. I have known my child's friend since she was a baby, and I consider her to be my second daughter. I have lots of people who are like that in my life, so I like this one. So it says, do I need a rental license? And it says, no. In this situation, both your daughter and her friend are part of your family, with the friend falling within the definition of domestic unit. And so this person who I encountered was like, I'm really confused. The cousins whether it's 1, 2, or 3, can't live together, but the friend and her person who's a second daughter can. And the person was like, I said, I get it, I'm confused too, and I don't want to impugn anyone's character about misleading or anything like that, because you read the FAQ here, I read it to you all, and I read this here, and this person I encountered was very confused, as am I. It seems to be that there's a merging of the domestic unit with a blood family, which to me seems to unravel the fabric of the code, because domestic unit does not limit the number of unrelated people in your home the way, having people, the family definition does. So the family definition says you can have a single person with one unrelated person. We've been told that many times over. And so once you merge a domestic family with the definition of a blood family, you've now opened yourself up, in my mind, and this is the discussion I was having with this person, to having unlimited unrelated people, which the code
30
to me
seconds remaining.
clearly says. So this was this week's story I want to share, because I think it highlights again the confusion. We want to keep things simple, that if you want to have people in your home who don't pay rent, we shouldn't have to have arguments and do diagrams and try to figure it all out in such a confusing, complicated manner. It should be that we can all maybe just say, like a regular grade, 8th grade level, come to some clear understanding and consensus on that.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Dr. Biber?
Good evening, I'm Nicole Kiwi Biber. I'm here, I saw that water affordability is part of the agenda, that discussion of that legislation that was introduced. Really glad to see that's being paid attention to. It's a wonderful, long overdue package that's being considered, has gone through committee hearings. I've had the privilege of hearing firsthand from people who have lived experience of being denied access to water. The rates have really increased exponentially to the point where here in the Great Lakes, where we have 20% of the world's fresh water, people can't afford to have that coming out of their tap. Those who maybe haven't struggled with the bills, it's a very nominal amount of money. It'd be about $2, and that would assure that, you know, all the benefits of knowing that your fellow humans have access to that, will not be denied water, will not be considered a felony, a criminal charge any longer if they turn it on out of desperation, things like that. So a few counties have submitted, you know, their support in writing. Maybe you all would want to consider that, or talk with your friends in the Ingham County Commission and say that this is an important matter to support. Clean Water Action, who I work for, is very involved in educating people more about this topic across the state, and so other organizations as well could be reached out to if you're interested in learning more. And from my own perspective, I'd also like to say that water affordability is very important, and also knowing that the water that we're hoping everyone can afford and have access to is clean. There's a lot of decisions that are made that look foremost at what's the economic benefit or what's a profit motivation. I certainly would suggest that that's probably not the best foundation for us to lay our policy making and our decisions upon. I think it would be clean water. That's what is uniting us all the time. It's a very basic human need. You could say that's a human right, and it's up to all of us to pause a bit and consider how our actions are affecting the water. Every small decision we make goes into that stream, okay? So that connecting point, I just wanted to say that when legislation and policy considers that as an overall public good and necessity, I think it's a right way to make our decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Carol Seaman?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the City Council for allowing me to address you this evening. My name is Carol Seaman, and I owned a house at 1522 Hitching Post from 1995 to 2021. When I moved 2 miles east in my mid-60s to find a home where I could age in place, I was sad to leave East Lansing. One of the factors influencing my move was the uncertainty about what my own needs would be in the future, and if I could potentially meet them by having other people live in my home to provide companionship, support, and informal caregiving for one another. It appeared needlessly uncertain about how I could essentially guess what my needs would be, and then hope that the city ordinances wouldn't block me from being able to achieve what I needed. I love East Lansing and know that we all want a safe and thriving community that welcomes and serves diverse community members from birth to death. Having also previously lived closer to campus, there are always concerns about making sure that we can be a good neighbor to MSU without having unreasonable noise, poorly maintained homes, trash, and vandalization in our own neighborhood. Obviously, ordinances and code enforcement are good and necessary to appropriately enhance the community. But when ordinances and enforcement are unfair or unduly restrictive, it is not a benefit to the community as a whole. I'm only going to speak to the issue of determining who can live in one's own home. I've never practiced municipal law, and I'm not only generally familiar with rental provisions and overlays as a concerned citizen. One overarching concept that drives my thought processes is trying to understand and keep in mind what ordinances are designed to accomplish and how to accomplish those outcomes in the least restrictive manner. My concerns are threefold. First, ordinance, rules, forms, and processes should be clear, direct, and succinct so that a reasonable, intelligent person can understand what is permissible, what is not, and how to proceed in their own personal circumstances. The current structure is not clear, as exemplified by the very different interpretations of words like guest that have been provided by city staff, council members, and community members in their questions and comments. I was a bill drafter for the Michigan legislature for over 3 years, about 20 years ago, and some of the most critical aspects of bill drafting are to use plain language, clearly define terms, place provisions together, or clearly cite how one can access other provisions that may pertain to a specific one, and inform people of penalties for any violation of the statute. Second, the ordinance should provide that homeowners are given timely notice of potential violations so that they can be remediated or effectively challenged. The testimony of bundled violations being delivered at once, resulting in thousands of dollars of fines, is inefficient, unfair, and as some cases have shown, possibly constitutionally infirm. My focus is on the fairness aspect. Most people want to follow the law, and many of you know I was Ingham County prosecutor, so I'm really, I'm aware of people violating the law. And most people act in good faith. But feeling betrayed and blindsided by one's own government, whether it's local or national, is disheartening and does not build trust or civic engagement, both of which are desperately needed in the U.S. today. Third, fines for violations should represent a fair amount to discourage continued violation without being excessive. Again, I know there has been testimony and materials provided about the excessive nature of many of these fines and the results of some of the court challenges. What I ask you is to facilitate a process that is respectful of community members, acts in good faith, and assumes the same of other participants, and provides the least restrictive alternatives for homeowners that meets the community's needs for safety and well-being. I believe that the proposed ordinance amendment is a way to accomplish that, but it may not be the only way. Most critical, however, is that the process be open, flexible, and civil. There is no room for blame,
30
disparagement, or
seconds
name-calling.
remaining.
That sadly seems to reflect so much of our public discourse these days. I urge the council to truly listen without preconceived biases and to be creative in ways to address these truly legitimate concerns. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Cindy Roper.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Roper, and I am, in addition to an East Lansing resident, I'm also a senior policy advocate with a group called the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I'm here tonight just to speak in support of the water affordability bills also that are going to be addressed here in a little bit. It sounds silly to say this, but water is essential to life, and sometimes we take that for granted. We take it for granted that we're going to go into our home and turn on the water and it's going to be running. But as Nicole said earlier, there are people all over the state that are struggling to keep their water on. In 2020, the Michigan legislature became the first legislative body in the country to set aside money to help families who were behind on their water bills. I find that shocking that no other state had done that previously, but kudos to the Michigan legislature for doing that in that year. And at that time, through bipartisan action, $25 million was set aside through CARES Act money. And the document that I distributed before the meeting is basically, I asked DHHS, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, to provide me with the data from the water utilities that participated in that assistance program. And at that time, 144 water utilities applied. The money was gone. There are 1,400 water systems in the state, so all that we know is what water utilities were able to get their applications in. This is the first and to date only utility level data that we have with regards to water arrearages and shutoffs in the state of Michigan. And I don't know why, you'll notice East Lansing isn't on there, and, I have no idea whether it's because we didn't have anyone who was behind on their water bills or because East Lansing didn't get in the queue in order to access the money before the $25 million went away. And granted, that was during COVID, but again, that's all that we have available to us. So we were beginning to see the statewide extent of Michigan's water insecurity problem. And I did it by legislative district because historically the conversation had been, this is Detroit and Flint and Pontiac and the Benton Harbor, the communities that were under emergency management. But what you can see is it was throughout the state. So where we are right now is that in 2023, the Michigan legislature once again stepped up and once again is probably alone amongst states in setting aside $60 million for water assistance. That is money that is going to be gone by the beginning of the next fiscal year for the state. We would love help from the city of East Lansing in pushing for additional appropriations in this next legislative session, because otherwise we're going to fall off of a cliff. But the bills you have before that you'll be hearing about today are really about solving the affordability problem. The other bills, the other money was about assistance, throwing money at unaffordable water bills. And the bills that are pending in the legislature would actually change the structure for how people who are under 200% of the federal poverty level would be addressing, being able to get their bills. So again, there's more information that's available. The public sector consultants did a study that again was kind of a higher level. It isn't utility data because we don't have that. We're working on a data transparency bill so that we can start learning more about who is behind on their water bills and how many water shutoffs there are in the state. That will be more comprehensive. But in the meantime, public sector consultants did a study, and on the website, which I did not include in what I distributed to you, but there's miwaterplan.com. You can find the public sector consultants' data, and you can also find U of M Water Center attempted a similar type of higher level analysis of poverty rates and unaffordable water based on a percent of income. So rather than taking the last bit of my time so you can keep moving forward, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and hope that we can count on you to also support the legislation and to show your support for the legislation moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Carol Hetherington?
Hi. I live at 826 Sunset. I've been in the neighborhood 34 years. I just wasn't planning on speaking, but I just had to share a little experience I had a couple days ago. The person that lives directly across the street from me, a young family, she was out there with her 3-month-old baby, and I went over and spoke with her like I always do, you know, and he's got a cold and whatever, and I said, had you heard about the charter amendment? And she goes, well, unfortunately, I signed it. And I talked to my husband about it, and he said, you know, we decided I definitely should not have. And she said, you know, I was outside just like I am right now, and he just wouldn't give up, you know, so I finally just signed it. She said, you know, I was just walking around with my baby, trying to, you know, check out my flowers, and I said, well, you know, you could rescind your signature, but that would require that you contact Mr. Rose, and because that's the procedure for rescinding signatures in this particular case. And she said, I'm sorry. She goes, I don't ever want to talk to him again. She said, but we definitely will vote against it, because when we bought this house, you know, they've only been here about a year maybe. So when we bought this house, you know, our realtor assured us that, you know, it wasn't an overlay and all this, and she actually, you know, it wasn't until recently. But that's the kind of experience I've heard. I have another friend, he refused, so Mr. Rose went to the house again and got his wife to sign. It's not been people, maybe people are grabbing the clipboard to get him out of their front yard, but it has been that kind of experience where she said, you know, I just couldn't take it anymore, so I signed. And it's upsetting that people have to feel that way when they're out in front of their house or they're answering their front door. But it has not been the kind of experience that was described earlier this evening from the neighbors I've spoken with. So I just wanted to share that. And I do wish that there was a simpler process for people to rescind, because I've talked to at least 5 or 6 people that would like to rescind, but they would like to do it through the city, but they don't want to do it by contacting the petitioners.
Thank you for your comments. Laura Sager?
I have copies, I think, that are down there if you want to distribute them. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate it. My name is Laura Sager, and my husband and I now live in Newman Lofts, downtown East Lansing. We love it. I've lived in East Lansing on and off since 1971 as both a renter and a long-term homeowner, about more than a decade in the Bailey neighborhood. I'm strongly in support of the ballot initiative under discussion today. There have been many instances where the city could have fined Tom and me for unknowingly violating the city's housing code had it been in effect at the time we were living there with long-term guests. We had various reasons, most notably part-time child care, and another case for having a person estranged from their family who was unrelated, living with us as a refuge. As you know, as the decades roll on, illness can take a toll on family and friends and may change the reasons for sharing a home. We have a close friend living in an overlay district who recently needed 24/7 personal care. I assisted her for a week until other part-time live-in housekeeping care and family members could take over. However, should we consider moving to her large home as a couple to provide unpaid personal and home care assistance, as I read the City Code of Ordinances, we would be prevented from doing so. The language seems unambiguous to me, and I'm familiar with legislative language, but since it's scattered through the code, it is confusing. Here's why I think we would be prohibited from assisting our friend in this way. One, we would not count as a domestic unit, as our relationship would not be permanent, we would not be responsible for basic material needs of the other, and we could not provide clear and convincing evidence of each of the elements of a domestic unit. So in reading the domestic unit criteria, we're out. We could not be a family under the definition that prohibits one person from having more than one unrelated person in the home for more than 60 days. There would be three of us, myself, my husband, and the homeowner. The City Code of Ordinances also rules out an association for convenience and economics, which really are considerations in the situation and potential disqualifiers. We would not be a domestic servant because we would not be paid, and our friend would not be paying our Social Security, so we're out there. We would not be guests under the code because we would plan to live there longer than 30 consecutive days or 60 days in a year. Therefore, we'd be deemed as renters, and our friend's house would be defined as a rental unit despite our not paying rent. This would require a rental license, and the overlay district would prohibit issuing a rental license in this case. This is a classic catch-22. Finally, we would not fit under the medical caregiver definition because we would not be licensed medical practitioners authorized via prescription to provide special care. To wrap up, many senior citizens may require caregiving from friends and family. We are not all so wealthy that we can pay a domestic servant or medical caregiver for 40 hours of work on an ongoing basis. I find it a bit shocking that we are looking at ways of shutting out solutions for people with lesser means or who may have cultural traditions that promote co-housing and the provision of care by friends and family. I've been following this debate and find the majority of the city council members oddly intransigent in this situation. Their descriptions of the initiative language have been misleading at best, resorting to impugning the character of those constituents engaged in a democratic endeavor to fix a problem is really beyond the pale. I urge you to
30 seconds
I
remaining.
urge you to engage in civil discourse so that people can focus on the issues at hand. As you recall, East Lansing home mortgages once routinely included exclusionary covenants meant to keep the wrong sort out. We would be the wrong sort out under the current code. The housing ordinances need to change to fit the needs of your residents, all of them, not just the ones wealthy enough to hire full-time domestic help. I've signed the ballot initiative petition and invite each of you to do the same. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have anybody in the queue?
We do have two callers in the queue.
Okay.
Caller with a number ending in 552, you're welcome to address council.
Good evening. This is Kath Edsel, the Vice Chair of the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission. In January, we passed a motion addressing a need to codify language to prohibit pretextual stops. While this motion was passed unanimously, I am speaking on my own behalf this evening. I'd hoped to be there in person. Unfortunately, a family situation took me out of town on short notice. Following passage of the motion, LEPOC passed a second motion asking for follow-through in April. On April 24th, I emailed council and included several resources, including an extensive empirical study from Stanford University and an article from Time Magazine, as well as articles regarding changes to the law in Philadelphia and Nashville implementing laws that outlawed pretextual stops. The summation of these resources and so many others come to the conclusion that pretextual stops don't make us safer. Rigorous studies have shown that pretextual stops turn up evidence of non-traffic crimes at an abysmally low rate, that they have no effect on crime rates, and And these same studies confirm that we invite officers to be led by their gut instincts and other unchecked heuristics. It is people of color who are disproportionately affected. Racial disparities in who gets pulled over erode trust in police and deepen the perception that police use race as a proxy for criminality. That's a direct quote from the Time magazine article. In my email from April, I summarized it to say that while they are protected under the Fourth Amendment, pretextual stops do not reduce crime, prevent crime, or uncover criminal activity in any way that justifies the inherent danger to both civilians and officers in practice. Furthermore, pretextual stops have been shown to be enforced disproportionately against marginalized communities, poor people, people of color, BIPOC people, and all of these articles that I sent support that data, as well as the research attached to that. LEPOC just recently received East Lansing Police Department May traffic stop data. And while there's not clarity on which are pretextual stops and which aren't, just traffic stops alone, there were 306 traffic stops, 169 were white people, which means 59% of the traffic stops in East Lansing were of white people, meaning 45% were non-white people. In the greater mid-Michigan area, the proportion of BIPOC individuals, approximately 24%. As regarding what I could separate out as pretextual stops about plates and lights, there were 97 of those stops out of the 306, and 58% were of white individuals, or 59% of the total. Again, way out of proportion with the 76% to 79% rate of white people in the mid-Michigan, Ingham County, East Lansing area. LEPOC, as well as myself personally, ask you to look at the motion that we passed. It's fairly detailed on the reasoning behind the motion, as well as the email, as well as the resources that I sent, and to consider passing an ordinance as written in the motion or with additional items on the list of things that police shouldn't be stopping individuals for. In the worst case scenario, things like expired plates, etc., you can take down the license plate number and issue a ticket through the mail so that we can prevent violent outcomes between officers and community members that are unnecessary. And that's one of the outcomes. For example, Philando Castile was a pretextual stop based on looking for an individual with his facial features, and ended up tragically in his death. So I hope by the end of this evening, I know there can't be a vote taken tonight, but by the end of this evening, you have outlined next steps and a time for when you will consider this motion for a vote to move forward. It's the first step towards making traffic stops more racially just in East Lansing. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Another caller in the queue?
We do. Caller with the name Susan, you're welcome to address council. Susan, you may need to unmute your phone.
Any luck?
Okay, no.
Okay. Moving on, communication from council members. Mr. Altman.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of comments that I hope will be brief. The meaning of the charter amendment that we've heard a lot about this week and last week and the week before is ambiguous and will be determined by the courts. I want to just address one of the possible meanings, which is that the city will only be able to regulate rental housing if tenants pay rent. If that is the meaning that the courts settle on, then what we will discover is that lots of people will stop paying rent. and will start paying utilities or the insurance or home maintenance or groceries or all the other costs that as homeowners we know are associated with owning a home. And so there's plenty of ways to disguise rent payments. And so, among other things, what you will see is a surge of situations which happen regularly now, but will happen in much greater numbers, where parents will buy houses for their child who is going to go to MSU, and then all the kids' classmates will pile into the house. And as long as nobody's paying rent, then those living situations will be completely unregulated, including no occupancy limits, because if you can't restrict who can live together, then you can't have occupancy limits. And so I did an inventory. We live in Bailey. We live in a typical Bailey-sized house, not too big, not too small. If we sold our house to parents who wanted to do this, you could have 5 kids living in our house, and each would have their own bedroom, and each would come with their own car, and one of them would be living in the basement without egress, so that would not be safe, and the city would have no capacity to police that. Rent is like water. It will flow around obstacles, and the policies that we have in place right now do a pretty good job. The proposed charter amendment will not work. For every complex problem, there is an explanation that is clear, simple, and wrong. And the charter amendment is maybe simple, it's not entirely clear, and it's certainly wrong. I also wanted to address what I'm afraid is becoming a public health issue here in the city. We now have dozens, possibly more, people in the city believing incorrectly that they can't age in place. Okay, we heard from a speaker at the podium last week who self-identified as an 82-year-old man who was living alone and thinking about his future care needs, and told us that under his understanding of the East Lansing City Code, he couldn't have a caregiver live with him, which is wrong. Okay? And we heard a speaker today say the same thing, which is also wrong. And this confusion would not exist if it weren't for this charter amendment campaign. This is about misinformation being spread by people for a political purpose, and that's a tragedy. But it's also a public health issue, I think, becoming a public health issue. And on those grounds, I think we have an opportunity and an obligation to do something about it, and I think we are. I think we're thinking about it, but we have a staff that's overworked, and they have a whole lot on their plate, and so it's going to take a while to get that information out, but we will try. We talked about misinformation in the context of the strategic planning process, and it's very difficult to counteract, and that's what we're dealing with now. The last thing I'll say is that people have a First Amendment right, I believe, to knock on your front door, but they don't have a right to harass or intimidate or threaten you with retribution if you speak out against a political campaign. If you have this kind of experience, call the police. Please call the police. That's really the only recourse that we have, and it's why we have the police. Thank you.
Mr. Meadows?
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about, how we are approaching potential revisions to the rental housing code, but I want to wait until that agenda item comes up. But I do want to comment, and I'll echo what Eric just said, which is for Laura. The 30 to 60 days doesn't apply to you unless you happen to be a guest in a rental property. If it's not rental, that 30 to 60 days doesn't apply. So I don't know who told you that, but it's not correct. I do want to talk about water affordability, though, and how important these bills are. I'm never sure, what I should talk about in terms of other things I might do, but, you know, for what it's worth, I'm chair of the political committee of the chapter Sierra Club here in Michigan, and I'm a member of the National Political Committee of the National Sierra Club, and I'm chair of their endorsements committee. We are scoring that vote, and we have let longtime supporters who are in the legislature know that this is an important vote for the Sierra Club, and it's an important vote for the people of this community and every other community. This is something that the work that has been done on this is tremendous, and we need to get this on the books. And I'm very supportive of it, and I thank you for coming and talking about it, and you coming and talking about it. It's something that we should all be encouraging our legislators to support. That's all I've got.
Councilmember Singh.
Yes, sir. A couple of things. One is, just want to remind folks, we had a presentation, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, on the Nixle Smart 911. Just a reminder, please sign up for that if you haven't already done so. More information at the city website. So calling all residents to get that signed up. The Charter Review Commission, a reminder verbally here, that applications need to be in by June 15th if you're interested in serving on that task force. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, is just a reminder of the Vernay Myers talk tomorrow. And I want to thank the city manager for closing city offices during that to help promote participation from staff across the board. So those are some reminders tonight.
Councilmember Watson.
Thank you. You threw me off with the order.
I know.
I didn't think I ever adopted a specific order.
You're right,
so
you
if
don't.
I
You just
threw
kinda
somebody off, I apologize, but
Tease us a little bit.
I probably won't ever stick to a specific order. So sorry about that.
No, so just to echo what Mayor Pro Tem said about the Smart 911, please be sure to sign up. I signed up for it. I might uncheck Meridian Township. They're very informative. And, but I do hope that we will follow in Meridian Township steps and in informing people about a particular train on the train that crosses on Hagedorn. It backs up, and it took me 45 minutes to get to work, but it would be nice just to get a Nixle alert to say, you know, it's backed up, or this is what's going on, similar to what Meridian Township does. But again, it helps you understand what's going on in the community, places to avoid, accidents that might have happened, and then some, because you can put your family's information in there, and if something happens, they can show up at your house and know kind of who might be there, including animals. As Councilmember Altman was speaking, I wasn't, you know, sometimes you feel like you're not going to talk and then you do. But as Councilmember Altman was speaking, I am proud to say I am the mother of my first graduate, and she's going to attend Michigan State University. She has received a housing exemption, which she put in for, because we live in the city of East Lansing, and you can do that when you live with your parents. But I looked up the costs of housing as well as meals, and I was seeing prices at Michigan State around like 24 grand. And so it's like when a parent figures out how to beat the system or how they could possibly financially gain and also give housing to their children, it's making sense to me. And I hope that we can create a community that is more affordable for people to move into. As I've discussed, this place would no longer be affordable for me if I was buying my house this year or a few years ago. I got lucky and I'm very thankful. But again, I live on Hagedorn. I live on a busy street, which meant the housing affordability that I could have put me not deep, into the neighborhoods. But it's like something's got to give, and I hope our council and our housing that we'll figure out our power in this. I'd like to see rent control. I'd like to see affordable, attainable housing for more people, not just people that can afford homes that are $200,000 or more, and to move into that. And I'll be talking about this more during our housing discussion, but there is a Housing Drives data book. It's a Tri-County initiative. And one of the things it says, so it talks about your key regional findings, and it talks about the city of East Lansing and all of the Tri-County groups. But I just want to point out one tab that says growth in senior population will drive demand for housing. And this is in the city of East Lansing. And so, and I spoke with the mayor during a meeting that we had, or a phone conversation about that. People are choosing and wanting to age in place, and they are able to do that here, and what it means for, other things to move. And the final thing I'm gonna say, I guess I can't remember what that was. Oh yeah, I do remember. It's important. Thank you for those who came to speak. And thank you for reminding us about our charge to have civil conversations, even if we don't agree with each other. It is important and of value to me that that we are treated in respectful manners, and that we treat our community in respectful manners. Obviously, none of us would be sitting up here if it wasn't for our community coming in and voting and putting some faith in us. And also, I hope that comes with listening to the community, even if we want to agree to disagree. Thank you.
Well said. I have nothing further. City Manager?
I'll just put a plug in for election workers. If you're interested, go to the city's website under the City Clerks tab, or call the City Clerk's office. Thank you.
Okay, discussion item 6.1, Rachel Elsinga, Community Development Manager, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and Chad Benson, Director of Development, Rental Development Division, Michigan State Housing Development Authority, to present on affordable housing programs. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, Heather, for, I guess, leading the charge here.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Elsinga. She's our Community Development Manager with Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC. Rachel and I meet monthly to give updates on what opportunities may there be for East Lansing. And then also Chad Benson, he is the Director of Rental Development, yes, with Michigan State Housing Development Authority, with MISTA. And so this evening, they're just going to talk to us about some resources and tools and programs that are available both through MISTA and MEDC.
All right, thank you. So as Heather said, I am the Director of Development for MISTA. So I specifically work in a division within MISTA that focuses more on larger scale rental and for sale housing development throughout the state. But MISTA does a lot of different programs in different areas to really encourage more housing affordability throughout the state. So we have a little presentation that I'm going to give, and to talk broadly about MISTA and what we're doing. And Rachel will chime in with MEDC items they're doing as well, and happy to answer any questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about the solutions for Michigan's housing supply shortage that we've been working on at MISTA. So just to sort of start out, we want to talk a little bit about some stats related to the current state of housing within the state and the housing crisis that we're in. So just to give a little bit of background, right now, based on the data, 50% of renters pay too much for housing. Typically, we look at if somebody's paying 30% of their income towards their rent. That's affordable. So there's definitely a lot more renters in the state that's paying more of their income towards rent, and it's they're overburdened in terms of their housing. Between 2012 and 2022, the average home sale prices went up 100%, while incomes only increased by about 40% during that same period. So that's making it harder and harder for people to afford their housing, whether they're renting it or they're buying it, as their incomes are not increasing at the same rate. In Michigan right now, currently, we're experiencing a housing shortage of about 190,000 units throughout the state. And along with that, about 53% of homes are more than 50 years old. So we're also dealing with aging housing stock that needs to be rehabbed as well. So we can go to the next slide. And then in terms of home ownership, we're working at MSHDA to try to close a gap that exists between what households can afford to buy, which the median household can afford a home that's priced at about $170,000, and the average sale price for a newly constructed home is much, much higher than that, at about on average about $450,000 throughout the state. So. But, I want to shift to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at MSHDA. We've made some great strides. 2023 was a historic year, so we'll go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about what we've done in 2023. This was our most productive year that we've had within MSHDA. In the area of home ownership, encouraging home ownership, we used about $650 million in resources towards mortgages and down payment assistance, and that supported about 4,400 households throughout the state, which is great. We also put significant amounts of resources towards multifamily rental, $490 million that created over 3,500 new and rehabbed housing units throughout the state. And then we also were being creative with new programs that we're developing as well, that are reaching areas of the housing market that we've never been able to reach before as an agency. One of those specifically was the Missing Middle Housing Program, and that was a $105 million program that supported 50 new projects throughout the state that would not have otherwise been able to be possible, and over 1,500 units through that program. So that was a great success, that program. And then additionally, there's some other programs like, I'm sure some of you have heard about these various programs, but the Housing TIF program, which is a new program that uses tax increment financing to support rental and for sale development throughout the state as well. And then additionally, CDBG is a federal resource that we have as a state that was previously at MEDC. Now it's at MSHDA, and we're using it for housing purposes as well. So those are a few of the highlights. And then additionally, we all experienced COVID-19, and MSHDA received a lot of resources that we put to work to respond to it and support renters and also homeowners that were experiencing the effects of COVID-19. So that totaled about $1.1 billion that we put towards it, and it supported renters through the SARA, the COVID Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and also almost 28,000 homeowners supported through the Homeowner Assistance Fund program that we put out as well. So, and I want to talk a little bit more about what that actually means in terms of the impact that we had this last year in 2023. So in total, if you total up those numbers, it's about $1.23 billion in MSHDA funding that we were able to put to work throughout the state, and that supported the purchase, construction, and rehab of about 9,600 homes throughout the state. And with housing, when you're doing construction and you're doing rehab, you're also creating construction jobs and putting people to work. So that was about over 6,000 construction jobs and about $226 million in wages. And as well, within MSHDA, we definitely, housing is our focus, but we also really make sure that we're watching out for vulnerable populations and homeless populations and disability populations to support them with homeless services and supportive services that they need to be able to live independently in housing. So we'll go on to the next slide. So I think that this is actually a very interesting slide right here that I want to spend a couple minutes on. And it really just talks about who do our programs support within the community. You know, certainly we have programs through Homeless Solutions, like I mentioned, that support the very low-income populations within the community. But, you know, a lot of times those populations that are 30 or 40% of area median income, which is still very low income, are food service workers. And you sort of work your way up the scale there. And we have, you know, our multifamily rental construction programs like the low-income housing tax credit program or our tax-exempt bond programs or certain gap funding programs that we put to work throughout the state are supporting those food service workers and teachers and librarians and first responders that are making, you know, somewhere in that, you know, 40 to 80% of area median income range within communities typically. So those programs sort of span that that segment. And then also with, you know, a lot of the newer programs that I mentioned the Missing Middle Housing Program and also Housing TIF. We are at MISHDA coming up with new programs to be able to reach the 80 to 120% AMI segment of the population, which is what we've always sort of classified as like the middle income workforce housing. I mean, the other lower are also people are working, you know, they have a job and they're paying rent and paying a lease. But meeting some of those other, you know, occupations like healthcare practitioners, professionals that, you know, they have a good job, but they can't afford the housing or they're paying more than what they should for the housing. So some programs like Missing Middle and Housing TIF to be able to support those middle income ranges as well that we're coming up with. So, and we realize at MISHDA that it's not just about creating tools that are sort of specific to the specific segments that we're trying to reach in terms of the population, but we need to be responsive to what the local needs are within the communities. So we've made a lot of effort with our statewide housing plan that we've been working on over the last few years to really identify the needs throughout the state and put together a strategy to you know, sort of take those needs on. And the strategy is played out with regional housing partnerships where we have groups that are coming together at the local regional levels that are putting together regional action plans, and we are listening to those plans and we're trying to be responsive to the local needs so that our programs are sort of matched up with what those needs are locally. And you can find information on that on our website. And lastly, you know, I just wanted to touch a little bit on what's next. So another new program that I didn't touch on before, but is just sort of fairly new for us is called the My Neighborhood program. This is a program where we're using $60 million in some of those funding sources that I talked about, like CDBG, and we're really trying to be very responsive to these regional goals. So we're looking at what those regional action plans are that are being developed, and we're really trying to use those resources so we're being responsive to the statewide housing plan. A couple other items that we are sort of pushing for at MISHDA is some legislative updates. A couple of those bills up there, Senate Bill 293 and also House Bill 5032. We're trying to get some more flexibility within our programs. Some of the programs we have, they have requirements that sort of limit our ability to use the resources, and we want to make sure that, like I said, we're using those resources to be able to get to the specific needs of the community. So we're looking for a little bit more flexibility in a few of those areas. And the other one is the House Bill 5032, which would raise our single-family purchase price limit. The last time it was raised was 2009, and we want to make sure that it's current with what current prices are. And then we also need additional support and funding for home ownership and workforce housing. There's not many federal tools that are available for workforce housing, which is that 80 to 120% AMI. So us as a state, we have come up with programs, but they need we need more funding to be able to do more, as there's a lot of demand out there. So those are some of the things that I wanted to touch on. I'm happy to answer more questions, and I'll pass it over to Rachel in case you want to add anything to that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Chad. So our work at the MEDC is to, with the community development program that I work for, is to work with communities to reinvest in opportunities that could be catalytic to spur continued growth and investment, to attract and retain talent in our commercial corridors and our downtown. So the roles and the incentives and the tools that we have through community development are really kind of guided through that lens. And so I really wanted to bring up, today that our tools do support housing, and we are all in it to win it together to try and make sure that we are providing attainable housing for 30% AMI to 120% ANI and above. Everybody deserves a safe and comfortable and clean and beautiful place to live. And so we're working in partnership with MSHDA to try and solve some of those problems. And so when we're talking about affordable housing, which is why you wanted us to come today, our lane really is focused in with our financial incentive tools, again, with creating vibrancy and density for places that may be blighted, they may have been abandoned, they have, they're functionally obsolete, or they may not have full, facilities in their best use at that time. And so we look at brownfield components. We look at that beautiful building downtown that's been, it's 100 years old and she's been vacant for 20 years, and maybe she's got a few stories above her that just need a little bit of love to bring back that vibrancy for commercial space, for retail, and maybe for some housing units. And that's just kind of like our love language spot. So when we look to our friends and our fantastic colleagues at MSHDA to really be able to dig deep, and the foresight of our governor and our legislators to double down on their investments and the programs and the tools that MSHDA has to offer to help solve this affordable housing component within the state of Michigan, we work with them first to understand how their programs and resources can come to the table to support that financial gap in those investments that we were talking about. So we work with them first to understand that, and then we really kind of evaluate based on our lens of investment and tools, focusing again on downtowns and commercial corridors. Could a few of our programs then help to incentivize that financial, that last piece to the table? And so we have a couple of programs through our revitalization and placemaking program that we're transitioning into becoming our grant-based program of $1.5 million for projects up to $5 million if they're exceptional in nature and truly transformative in nature. We also have our community revitalization and placemaking program that is now transitioning to be our low-interest loan or equity contribution program. So we're kind of in transition, again, based on the response of and the needs of our friends at MSHDA and the tools and the resources they have, making sure that our tools and resources can then align to be complementary, but also then focus on that revitalization component. Our tools are best served when we're looking at housing opportunities between that 80 to 120% AMI. We're not looking to incentivize luxury apartments. And again, our friends at MSHDA have these incredible tools and resources to support and financially incentivize projects that are 80% and below. So it's kind of a special little dance that we get to play together now, especially with that housing TIF. How can we come to the table with that workforce housing group? And we live in a region, by the way, that most of our rents fall into a naturally occurring workforce housing rate. So that's to our benefit, to our investment opportunities. How can we play at that table together? And so we look forward to continuing to work with Chad and his team at MSHDA, applying our resources. And just to give you a bit of perspective, our revitalization and placemaking program, we anticipate having another tranche of $50 million coming through, and then our community revitalization and placemaking program generally runs around $20 million a year. So our financial resources are significantly smaller, but again, we're solving a very niche market as well. We're applying that to a much more of a niche market where we have a lot more work to be doing, I feel like, in the affordability of that 80% and below AMI. We've also never had, in a time in our lives since our programs began, more of a need. Our pipeline is incredibly robust, and so we look for veins of competitiveness always when working with developers. We ensure and we work with every community that we place an investment in. Are we checking the right boxes? Is it, again, in that place that's dense, vibrant? Are we increasing, walkability, safety components? We want to make sure it's part of your master plan. So we're never going to make investments that don't make sense to the community as ourselves. They are taxpayer dollars, and we take those very seriously. So happy to talk with Chad or answer any questions you might have. But right now, we're really just trying to figure out how we can continue to complement the work that MSHDA is doing while staying, in that mixed-use kind of component within our commercial downtowns and traditional corridors.
Okay, questions for our presenters? Dr. Altman?
I had a question about how you put a number on the housing shortage, right? So the number was 190,000 in Michigan. Is that the number of units you need to build to bring prices below a certain level, or is it the number of units you need to build to reduce overcrowding by a certain amount, or is it some combination?
So I may have to get back to, so we have a lot of people within MSHDA that are looking at this very closely, that are looking at the data, looking at the numbers, and these are the numbers that they're developing based on the need and all the data points they're looking at. I don't know off the top of my head exactly, how the formula and various things like that is arrived at, but I can get back to you and provide that for sure.
So I guess what I'm driving at is how much of the shortage is people being priced out versus just not enough houses for people to live in, or is it both of those?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably both of those. The cost is significant. Like I said, the cost of housing is going up much more than incomes are going up, but also there is, shortages of units that we're working to create as well. So happy to have more discussion on that or connect you with people to have more discussion on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for presenters? Yes, ma'am.
Did you want to go? Yeah, sure. The bills that you referenced, I'm not familiar with either of them, but it's the one about raising the, will you tell me can you break that down more for me?
Yeah, so you're talking about the sales price limit. So my understanding of that one is the limit has been basically what it is since 2009. So the limit has not risen. I believe that's around $225,000 is the price limit. And the way that what the legislation would do is basically increase that cap. But the result of it would be that there still are income limits within the program as well. So it would just allow that price limit to sort of match up better with the income limits of residents within the community that qualify for the down payment assistance. So if a certain household qualifies because they're 100% AMI or something along those lines, they're not inadvertently just cut off because it's above the limit. It sort of allows the price to go higher because of that.
Okay.
So,
So it's incorrect for me to read it as we're looking to increase the amount that people can afford, or that we're looking to increase an amount, but really what's going to end up is people are paying prices that they can't afford for their mortgages. So that's not the correct, translation.
Right. No, what it will do is basically allow it so we can serve more households throughout the state by allowing it. So we're allowing the program to work better in terms of increasing the affordability. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you say you guys distribute the CDBG funds?
We do.
I don't know, I'm going to just give some feedback, and I hope
Sure.
that if you guys have a policy analyst or something like that that can take it forward. Speaking of percentages, people who qualified for down payment assistance still couldn't afford to live in the city of East Lansing. And it kind of feels like an antiquated system because it's about dollar amounts and not about percentage of the home or percentage of what the down payment would be. And so hopefully, I don't know if that can be taken somewhere or that they can get some feedback on that.
Okay.
Yeah. For people.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I think the Mayor Pro Tem had
Over here.
Go ahead. Take a number.
Who's that jazzy music?
Maybe Mr. Meadows can turn his phone off first.
Okay, thank you for coming this evening, and, I know it was referenced, the regional tri-county housing plan. East Lansing is short 1,100 units at various economic thresholds. So the magic sauce I'm looking for, and I know some of the programs may not be perfectly aligned to some of those income thresholds, but is how do we spur the developers to move outside of the incentives that are already out there with current programs? What I'm hearing, I had a long talk on a different front, that there seems to be a disconnect in regions of this state, because we know you guys have mobilized amazing programs, there's tools, but there's still a gap in spurring the development. So I would think there's demand in East Lansing. Like, there doesn't need to be an economic development employer that lands here to spur, a supply drive. So tell me how to fix this.
Yeah,
or how
so-
are you going to fix this?
How
Michelle?
are we? Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
I had to put
right.
anyone on point.
Well,
but-
I think that part of what we're doing is we're creating these different tools that sort of work for different types of developments and sort of what you're looking to do within your area. So some of these new tools, like I said, missing middle or housing TIF, they're programs that didn't exist before,
Right.
and there there really wasn't a program like it before. It didn't replace a program. There just wasn't anything like it, and so there was probably opportunities for developers that were out there, but the numbers didn't make sense, and now there's these programs that are helping to sort of fill that gap, and I think that that's what we're looking at is like encouragement, for things, developers looking at things in a new way, and seeing these tools as like an opportunity to be able to do development that maybe would have been difficult before.
Okay, and a follow-up, on the missing middle, you had two statements. In your presentation, you talked about the missing middle program and the number of dollars that went out, but then you also referenced legislation that was pending. So is the missing middle 80% north?
The missing middle
Active.
is so it's 80 to 120% AMI. Right now, we are fully subscribed with our resources,
Okay,
so
so
we
you
need more resources to be able to keep doing missing middle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think if I could just kind of add to the first question you had. So I think, we're trying to figure out those nexus points with each other, and we're kind of flying this plane together as it's just sort of lifted off this, past fiscal year. A great example would be their housing TIF tool, right? It is truly the cost at the end of the day. We don't want to over-incentivize a project. We're not trying to make developers rich by any means, but they do have a right to make a profit, right? So we're trying to find what that fine balance looks like. The housing TIF is such a generous capture because it offers different revenue streams that were never able to be captured before with a traditional TIF, including vertical construction and a rent rate differential. So they've, MISHTA's established what maximum rate could be for rents, and then you look at, subsidy in between what you can charge and get within your market, and that is a potential to capture at the end of the day. So the TIFs are just incredible these days, and so when working with MISHTA, we would have a developer try and understand what they could capture for a project that would be, is it 51% or more housing is how we're trying to figure out how we can partner something like, it's a percentage that's close, like it needs to be significantly a housing project, right? So we can use that and then see if we can, if there's still that financial gap, we're maximizing that. We would then be that final piece to the table, either through the RAP program or the CRP to make that project whole, so we can provide more units of affordability to our residents.
Okay.
And that's kind of a new thing right now, so we're working that together.
Yeah, I'm anxious. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm a simple gal when I see 1,100 unit shortage over 5 years. People want to be here. We have new programs. There's land. We got developers. So go. Let's go. So as much as however we can be a resource to, activate and move forward to, help remedy that shortage, I think would be great. And the last thing I would say, the families that you had that slide with the color, I love that slide. I need that slide.
Okay.
On a separate front.
It is a great slide. Yeah.
Same, but different.
Yes.
And are those state averages or is that a regional for this?
The
region?
incomes, you
salaries,
mean?
yeah.
I'd have to check on that too. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly if it's regional or state. I'm assuming it's probably statewide, but
That would be
yeah,
my
I would
guess.
assume that. Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Benson, I'd like to go back to your PowerPoint.
Sure.
If we could
Yeah.
get it back up there. I think it was your second or third slide, you were showing us, you had a top line that said the amount of resources you had available, and then I think the second or third line was the units that you had financed.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going. Okay, I was wrong. Keep going. It was one that had billions at the top.
This one?
There you go.
Okay, yeah.
So
Yep.
you said 1.23 billion in total MISTA funding,
Mhm.
and then supported the purchase, construction, or rehabilitation of 9,627 homes. Nobody at your shop is suggesting that the entire 1.23 billion was spent on that 9,267 homes, are you?
So the 1.23 billion was a combination of mortgages and down payment assistance that we were able to support families with, and then also the new construction and the rehab of several thousand homes as well. So yeah, I mean the 1.23 billion is it's what we're able to put out in 2023, but it's a combination of multiple different things.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
maybe a better question would be,
Sure.
is the 9,627 homes purchased, constructed, or rehabilitated a subset of the 1.23 billion, or does the 1.23 billion, is that the entire universe? I'm trying to find out how much you're spending on each of those 9,627
Yeah,
homes.
and so I guess an answer to that is it varies based on program. Some of the programs, because they are targeting deeper affordability, there's more resources that need to go towards a unit. Some programs, because there's like workforce housing, takes less subsidy to be able to make a deal feasible. So you can, so it's a combination of a lot of different things. I can look at the numbers and get back to you on that with the exact.
Let me ask
yeah.
it another way.
Yeah.
Was all the 1.23 billion utilized for the 9,627 houses?
I will check on that and let you know.
Okay, so the answer
Yeah.
is you don't know standing here tonight.
I
Can
will-
you get us
I-
that information, please?
I will. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yep.
Mark?
Okay, you did a great job of talking about House Bill 5032, so I now understand that a little bit more.
Yeah.
But Senate Bill 293, can
Yes.
you give me a little more detail on that?
Yeah. So the Housing and Community Development Fund, which is a resource tool that we use at MISTA, there are specific income requirements that go associated with it. It's prescriptive within the legislation, and what that does is it makes it so when we get those resources, we can only use it towards certain household income ranges, like 60% of area median income and below is one of them. And what we would like to do is be able to have the flexibility to also use it like towards workforce housing, so 80 to 120% and various things like that. So that's, in a nutshell, that's sort of, yeah.
So just to increase for the workforce housing, or generally to increase? I'm just curious.
I couldn't hear you there.
You talked about raising it above the 60% to go to 80 to 100% for workforce housing.
Mhm.
Is that the only thing you're seeking to raise it for?
I think that there's some other items. That's one of the items.
Okay.
Yeah. So flexibility like that. Yeah.
Got that. And then if you do have there at MISTA sort of a fact sheet on how you think the housing TIF will work, because we've used TIF to build a lot of housing in East Lansing.
Yeah.
With a lot of pushback with regard to using TIF. So
Okay.
I'd like to know more about that particular program.
Yeah.
And if you've got a fact sheet, just forward it to the city clerk or the city manager so that he can get a copy to us. Okay?
Sure. Yeah. we
And
can do
then both Councilmember Watson and myself have been board members of Capital Area Housing Partnership, which is low to moderate income housing. So I want to thank you for the help you've done on Walter French and the rehabilitation there in the Bailey Center here in East Lansing. And I'll note that we have a developer who has made an application to you for low to moderate income housing along Valley Court in East Lansing. We hope it gets a positive response this time.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, we were happy to be a part of those deals for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
I have one more question.
Ms. Swanson?
The housing choice vouchers.
Mhm.
Did you know that our city of East Lansing, we have like 2 or a very small number? Did you know that?
How many vouchers?
Yeah.
I did not know how many vouchers. No.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
it's
Yeah.
not like, when you look at some people live here, some people work here, some people drive through here.
Mhm.
And sometimes I work in public health, you talk to clients and they're interested in
Mhm.
moving into the suburbs, but the housing choice vouchers aren't accepted. Unfortunately, they're not distributed here to the percentage that it should be at. Have you seen any changes anywhere in the state of Michigan, and how did they do it with housing choice voucher access? Like, did you see any other, suburbs or cities increase their housing choice voucher options?
So I would hesitate to comment on that. I guess that's a little bit outside of the area that I work in, but I would be happy to. I can certainly get you the answer to that question. Happy to connect you with those folks.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I appreciate it. If you can get us answers to some of these
Sure.
questions, we'd really appreciate it.
Would be
Thanks
happy
a
to.
lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, item 6.2, legislative updates regarding short-term rentals, rent control, and the statewide water fund. Mr. Bellman?
Actually, Maureen Watson-Bulger is here to update you on those.
Oh, there she is, okay.
legislative
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Maybe we'll start with the short-term rental discussion. I think that's the one we've touched on the most in the past, and so it's really just an update. The bills are still in committee right now. There's continuing work being done by a variety of stakeholders around this item, and at the moment, I think, I've got the current draft that I received this afternoon. We were on an H1 last time I was before the council, and we're now on an H2 that is on draft 4. So I think there's a fair amount of work that is continued behind, working with stakeholders around this. Right now, and the reason I think this is sort of a quick update is that the language suggested by the city attorney is included in the new draft that we received. So the city's concerns regarding how short-term rental legislation would proceed, I think right now we're protected. We've had continuing discussion led largely by Representative Brixey, who was on one of the bills in the package, to make sure that she stayed close to that, and then her staff shared this new draft with us today that they had received. So I think right now that one remains, in committee. Both sides have really passionate opinions around this issue and continue to try and find, if it's a compromise or, to move it out of that committee. So that one I think, is similar to the discussion that we had the last time that I was before council. The only update I would say on the Senate side of that is that the one of the committee chairs of the local government committee, I believe, mentioned short-term rentals as something that he might want to work on in the future. And so I would just bring that one to the attention that we've worked significantly in the House, and I believe the bill package there remains, consistent with the amendments we requested. But we'll continue to watch what happens over in the Senate. I've reached out to ask, if there are timelines or any information like that, and I would say at the moment, there's not a significant update on that. But obviously, any chamber can introduce legislation and move it, at their preference. So we'll continue to watch that one. Is there any additional concern around short-term rental that you'd like addressed?
Do you have a hypothetical prediction for us? as to whether,
My crystal ball,
which
I think
I'm
was-
not going to hold you to, but
I appreciate that. I don't actually get to make that decision.
floating around out here someplace, do you have any expectation that the bill or package of bills that you just identified will actually come to a vote before the election in November?
I don't think so, and I'll talk about that in the context of timeline. You know, the legislature has a requirement to have a balanced budget in place, and generally tries to make sure that that is in place by the end of June, so that both schools and local governments have those revenue estimates as you put in place your budget starting on the fiscal year for July 1. So the remainder of most of the work this month, I would say, will be largely focused around budget. So I would be surprised if a significant package like this was also able to be sort of worked out at the same moment, just because I think the appropriations focus is really intense at the moment to make sure that that is done before the legislature finishes the month, to make sure that everyone has those estimates for their budgets. And then I think the next really busy time will probably be after the November election. You know, it's possible that things could move in the fall, as you said. You know, we can't predict necessarily, but I think largely it looks like it's unlikely to move before probably the December session.
I hesitate to ask you those kind of questions because
I
we
know,
have this
because then I'll be wrong.
we have these insiders, you know, sitting at the table with me, and everybody in this town knows I got nothing. So I have to ask you these stupid questions just because I'm just wondering. I'm thinking maybe the taxpayers and all the people that are commenting on these different
Might
issues
be interested, yes.
So your best hypothetical guess is nothing will really happen on this topic until December, if that.
I think so.
Correct.
I think there's additional conversation happening in both chambers around this issue. You know, there are a lot of passionate advocates on both sides, and they'll continue to talk to their legislators, and it's possible that one of them moves a legislator to act on the issue sooner than that.
When pigs fly. Okay, what else? Questions on that at all, Mr. Oldham?
Just briefly, I wonder if you could give us a sense of the sort of landscape of the interests that are shaping this issue. You've mentioned several times that the interests are very passionate on both sides. What are the sides?
In general, I think there are sort of associations that have represented you know, both sides and provide testimony in committee. The legislature does post all of the written comments and has video available of the committees that you can really see sort of the debate that takes place on the issue. You sort of end up with local governments that want the local control on one side of the issue, and then on the other, sort of more of a maybe property owner position who want the flexibility to do what they want with their property. And that sort of breaks it down, but
And there are trade groups on the property owner side, the realtors.
Yep.
I would think there's a short-term rental industry, I suppose, that supports.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, other questions on this topic? Were there a couple of other things you were going to inform us about tonight?
yes, so maybe we'll talk about water affordability. That's been, I think, one there's been a lot of interest around. And I would say some of the public comments stole some of my thunder to direct you all to the miwaterplan.com. This is a wonderful resource that has been put together by advocates supporting this legislation. It is not usual to have an actual website with so many of the resources regarding the legislation, things like current substitutes, explanations of changes that have been made to the current drafts. So I think that that is a really wonderful resource if you're looking to get some more information around what the water affordability package would do. This is a lot of times talked about in the context of the Senate legislation, but there's actually a House plan as well. So it's introduced in both chambers and has had a hearing in both chambers. In the Senate, that is going through the Housing and Human Services Committee, whereas in the House, it's actually going through Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation. So they've taken sort of different tracks in the two chambers, and there was a lot of, I think, coverage of the committee hearing. There were a lot of stakeholders that were involved, and I think there's been a lot of work by the advocates and the legislators that sponsored the legislation to continue working on that and respond to sort of testimony that was brought up during that committee hearing. And if you're interested in the current drafts, they are posted on that website, which you can't always get those ahead of time. So I think that is really a really transparent, publicly accountable way to be working on this issue. The legislation, as it was introduced, is somewhat modeled after energy assistance in terms of collecting, a surcharge or some dollars along with monthly alongside customer's bill, and then sending that to the statewide level, and then that would be used to provide water affordability assistance. One of the, I think, significant changes that was made is in the current drafts is that those dollars, as they're collected sort of regionally, would remain within a region as opposed to sort of a statewide distribution. And I think that idea is to, as you're collecting resources within a region, that it benefits sort of folks within that same region. That's one of the, I think, significant updates that one of the Senate sponsors, highlighted as part of the changes that were made. So I wanted to share that with you because that is different from the introduction version. But essentially, the bills are looking to create that type of assistance that the state would have available, as we do in energy assistance that's distributed to make water affordability a more affordable resource in Michigan.
Same questions.
I have been told this one could have more support, but I'll tell you, like everything, in some ways, there's passion on both sides of this issue. I think whenever you create an assistance program, right, the question is who pays and who benefits. And I think that right now there's a lot of work being done to bring along folks that have concerns around that. I think that change that I referenced is one of those that they felt would help maybe bring along some additional support. But I think that, the stakeholder engagement has been pretty extensive, really across all regions of the state, that the legislative sponsors are really trying to get to a space where they feel like they have the votes. And so I think that they're working hard on that. I think this one will possibly see, certainly, I think, committee votes. I don't know when that will happen. I expect largely, as I said, budget will dominate our time now. I'm not sure if, how many days a September session looks like and what, the agenda is at that moment. But I do think that, there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes to continue to encourage people that are uncomfortable with the legislation. What amendments would they be seeking that would encourage their support? I think that there is a lot of outreach across the state to continue sending in support to the legislature so they hear from folks that are supportive, that this is something that they would like to see done. There's also folks that are uncomfortable or concerned about it as well. And so I think they're concerned with creating to increase another fee that makes things more unaffordable, even in, the process. So I think there is discussion on both sides, but because of the extensive work around stakeholder engagement, I think that this, could possibly move forward.
Other questions on water affordability? Any other questions? Okay. Did you want to talk to us about the rent control issue?
I think, there is some requested information around that one as well. So 4947 was introduced by Representative Reingans, and this is a reintroduction of a bill that had been introduced before, I believe, by Senator Irwin. And so I think that this one is, what it would do is repeal Public Act 226 of 1988, which I had to go learn a little more about. So that legislation passed at a time where it looks like, from some of the newspaper articles and things like that, that Ann Arbor and Detroit specifically, but there could have been others, were working to create rent stabilization or rent control policies. And then I think in some ways the state stepped in and prohibited that local control around that issue. And so I think the bill, while it looks really simple sort of on the face of it, because it's a 3-line bill that just repeals what that was, I think it would have I think farther reaching impacts than sort of what a 3-line bill looks like, which is often the case, that if it looks really simple, it probably does a lot. And right now, what the committee chair in the House has shared, which this is before the Economic Development and Small Business Committee, is that the bill at this point doesn't have the votes on the committee or on the floor, but that there is a lot of advocacy and education going on sort of behind the scenes on that issue as well. So he didn't anticipate it coming up. He didn't have a timeline he could share with us, but he did say that he had heard outreach from a number of even committee members that had questions and continued to have concerns around the bill. So that one, I'm not sure that it has the same momentum as maybe water affordability did that I just spoke about.
Other questions? Thank you for coming.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I appreciate the article that you added, because at the bottom it talks about other states and groups that are trying to do something, and so that's helpful to try to think about how to solve this. So you said the votes weren't there, or what was the other word you used?
Maybe support. Did I say votes or support?
All right. And so I'm wondering, will this group of people change at some point soon, or like if I wanted to or encourage people to reach out to the people that made that decision, is it the same people, or yeah?
Sure, it's the committee. So as I mentioned, the bill is before the Economic Development and Small Business Committee in the House, and I do think that they are interested in whether it's letters or calls, information about legislation in general. And I think you should and could always reach out to legislators that make those types of decisions. So I think that's
and so it's more helpful to reach out to them, this group of people, than to reach out to our senators and our representatives and ask them to please do something and advocate.
I think both are helpful. I mean, your legislative delegation cares specifically about, their constituents' concerns, I think, in a really meaningful way. I think that when you're a committee chair, you of course care about what your constituents are bringing to you, but you also care statewide on the issue that you have sort of been given the responsibility to look into by being the chair. So I think you can reach out to both, I think that hearing from colleagues is important, so a committee chair could hear from a local, legislator about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for coming, and I think this council is very interested in hearing from you and your firm frequently. So I would just ask that you get with the city manager, and if it's at all reasonable for everybody's schedule, to have you come at least quarterly and sort of give us an update. These are obviously,
we'd be happy to, yeah.
These are issues that are important to the city, and even though something may not be happening, I think we'd like to have that information as well.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Okay, item 6.3, discussion of rental housing ordinance. Mr. Meadows?
I guess this is me, huh? I was struck by the comments of our former prosecutor this evening, indicating that language should be clear, direct, and distinct, plain language, clearly defined terms, open, flexible, and creative in terms of addressing some of the concerns that people in the community have about the rental housing ordinance. And that's exactly what we are proposing that we are going to do. So I wanted to just take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the project that Annette Irwin and City Attorney Tony Chubb and myself sort of started a week or two ago. The objective is to recodify the rental housing provisions into a single chapter or section of the city ordinances. I think that there has been comments earlier from people at the podium who talk about how difficult it is to identify those things which might apply to rental housing. And, some people could say, if I think that we should address this now, why didn't I think we should address this 20 years ago? Because I've been around council for such a long time. At the time that we adopted the International Property Code, the advice provided to us was that this was the way we had to set it up. It changed the way that we had originally passed these provisions, but I guess I accepted that. But I look at it now and I think that when I look at the provisions of the International Property Code, which seem specific to rental housing, I can't think of a reason why it can't be in a single location so that people can follow along on this a lot easier than is allowed right now. And we began to look at how we can change some of that language and move it to a different location so it is much clearer. And with regard to any sort of ambiguity that might be in the code, we want to take a look at that and eliminate that ambiguity. I think that's another thing that probably the prosecutor would want us to do. So right now, the provisions applying to rental housing are in Chapter 1 of the code, which includes the authority to ensure general safety, standards for repair, duties of code officials regarding inspection, issuance of corrective orders, and the process that can be utilized for violations. All that should be in what is the main portion of the rental housing code, which is Chapter 10, which contains most of the provisions. And Chapter 2 of the code has the definitions, which should also mostly be in the rental housing code in Chapter 10, which I think would facilitate a lot of things because generally speaking, when you construct a code, you put the definitions right up towards the front of that. And anyone who is thinking, can I have a guest, would have read the guest definition and understood that that there is one provision regarding guest for rental housing, and there is another provision regarding guests for non-rental housing that has very little limitation as to what person can be a guest. And maybe today, as we thought about it in 1997, maybe we need to expand some of these definitions. So those are the things that we're going to be talking about, and the aim is to bring back to council a suggestion as to what those changes should be, and that it be referred to probably the Planning Commission and the Housing Commission for their review and recommendation as to those changes and how they would work. And certainly we want to have the staff that enforces this code to also have some impact on how the changes might be looked at. So I want to make it clear that it'll probably take a month or two before we have something ready for general public consideration. But the objective is to make sure that the entire population of this city has an opportunity to review this and take a look at it and provide input to the council with regard to any changes that might take place. And I'll keep you informed on the progress. So I thank you for the time here. And I want to, just because of how the comments went this evening, I do want to talk about sort of my difference of opinion as to the meaning of paragraph 1 of the ballot proposal. I know that Patrick and I are never going to agree on this, I know, but I've been reviewing statutes and using them and arguing in court about them for the last 50 years. So I read this first paragraph in the following way, and I don't think it has anything to do with the comma in the last phrase that that was mentioned earlier, it's the or that is in this, followed by a comma. And I will just tell you that, there's a whole book of jurisprudence on the meaning of the word or and the meaning of the word and. So for me, as I read this, the word or is what sets these two phrases apart. And it means that the first phrase basically says the city can't restrict in any way the relationships of persons living together as a household or residing in a home, meaning we just can't do it. It's a change to our zoning code, for one thing, but it also means that we don't have the authority any longer to restrict the number of people who live in a house. It doesn't relate to whether somebody is paying rent, but the second phrase clearly does. And I'll just say that I haven't relied on somebody else's typing of a provision. I relied on something that Patrick put out back on April 17th. It was the final version that was put out in an email. And I'll just note, Patrick didn't write this. Somebody else wrote this. So at least as I understand it, a county commissioner actually wrote this language. That's what I understood. Oh, well, I thought you said that. But in any event, the final phrase, which has this comma before as long as such persons are not rent-paying customers, in my considered opinion, does not qualify in any way the first phrase. It qualifies only the second phrase. And that's why my position has been that this really undermines and destroys the ability for us to restrict the number of individuals who would rent in a property, and means that the overlay districts become meaningless. So that's my opinion. We haven't asked for an opinion of the city council in any way whatsoever. That is just my personal opinion and my analysis.
And thank you for your presentation. I think the ask that I made of you and the city attorney and the city staffer was because there was a lot of cogent criticism of the current matrix of legislation, and in my perfect world, perhaps if we reorganize and rethink these ordinances, we won't need dueling attorneys to give their opinions as to what certain language means. So thank you for doing that, Mark, and undertaking that, and thank you for staff for doing that. And let's just see if we can move ahead.
Sounds good.
And figure out a way to make this a little bit simpler for everybody, to everybody's benefit. So, any other discussion on that?
And any questions?
Dr. Altman?
Just to echo your last point, Mayor, that Councilmember Meadows was referring to chapters 1, 2, and 10. There's nested chapters in the code, so those are all chapters in section 6-175 of the code, which is part of chapter 6 of buildings and big building regulations. So.
Okay, so the work of the subgroup will continue, hopefully, and get us some proposed language sometime in the next 30 to 60 days. Correct, Mark?
Correct.
Thank you for doing that. Okay, item 6.4, employment policies update.
May I have 5 minutes?
Yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute break? Sorry about that. Sorry. sorry. I'd like to bring us back to the meeting, item 6.4, employment policies update.
Good evening, Council. I'm Emily Kenny, Director of Human Resources. I'm here today to discuss the City Employment Policy Update project that I've been working on. I started this project by identifying the policies that we needed to create and implement, and I did this working with the city's labor attorney to make sure that we were developing all the policies necessary. For many of the new policies, I used templates from SHRM, or the Society of Human Resources Management, which I have access to as part of a membership. The templates were then updated with city-specific information. The other aspect of the project was reviewing the existing policies and identifying updates that were needed due to current practices or outdated information. Once all of the proposed changes were made, the draft policies were distributed to department heads for feedback. Once that feedback was incorporated, the policies were reviewed by the city attorney and the labor attorney. And now I'm seeking your input and feedback. The next step in the process will be to distribute them to the unions to get their input and feedback. All the new policies are still in draft form. They include a whistleblower policy, social media policy, Pregnant Workers Fairness Act policy, employee conduct policy, remote work policy, FMLA policy, ADA policy, and a timekeeping wage and hour policy. And then the existing policies that were updated were the non-union personnel rules, which were created in 1999, a cell phone policy, the drug and alcohol policy, the harassment and discrimination policy, dress code policy, and the identification card policy. The existing policies that were not updated as part of this review were the reporting safety hazards policy, the EEO policy, safety committee, safety program, tech and computer use policy, and the weapons prohibition policy. You've been provided with all of the drafted policies, the updates to the existing policies, and those existing policies that are not being updated in your agenda packet. I'm happy to answer any questions you have and welcome any input you'd like to share on what I've been working on.
I have some questions.
Sure.
But go ahead. Go ahead,
I just
Mr.
have
Rose.
one, if I may. On the drug and alcohol use policy, the updates, and I'm not, I don't know if this is all updated or this is some older language, but I was particularly struck by the first, under general, the first sentence. So it says, employees may not use, possess, conceal, manufacture, distribute, dispense, or sell controlled substances, narcotics, or drugs unless such use has been prescribed by a physician. So I think that last phrase is supposed to apply only to the use of that, but the way it's written, it appears that, hey, if you got a prescription, go ahead and sell, because now you have a prescription and you're exempt from this restriction. So I'm just suggesting that that be cleaned up a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll make note of that.
Go ahead, Eric.
On the same policy, this was, so I don't know how much it's been updated, but this was passed originally in 2005. Since then, medical marijuana is legal in Michigan. So that's one issue. And related to that is, do we require availability for random drug testing?
We do not. In practice, it's a suspicion. So if there's a suspicion that somebody is under the influence, then we reserve the right to take them to have them drug tested or have a breathalyzer at that time. But we do not random drug test them.
So that's good. I would just clarify that. But it wasn't clear to me that it was based on suspicion. And maybe that's in here, but I had this question about whether it was a blanket policy or triggered by suspicion, and if that's the case, and I missed it, or if I didn't miss it, something that wasn't there, it might be helpful to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then my other general question was about, were you following templates or best practices? And you answered that at the outset. You the missing policies were all informed by templates that you've had access to.
Yes, correct.
And those presumably are kept up to date, I guess. So social media, for example, is going to be something that evolves quite rapidly, and so those are all
Yes.
current. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Watson?
Thanks. Since we're on the drug and alcohol one, so this isn't about pre-employment, right?
Correct. Yeah, we do have certain positions that require pre-employment drug testing, but this one is specific to
Okay.
employees are provided this on their first day.
And then these days, we like to change the terminology of marijuana to cannabis. And so if that's a possibility to say cannabis instead of marijuana.
Yes, definitely. I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Anything else?
Well, not on that one. Like, do you, like, yeah.
On anything?
Okay. I do have a few.
Go ahead.
So you got a little bit of time. So you mentioned the dress code. I don't think we've got a dress code link.
Oh, did you not get a link to that one? I'll make sure to follow up with it. I apologize. Generally, just for sake of conversation, we added a summer dress code, which would take place between Memorial Day and Labor Day, which is the same dress code as a casual Friday, in other words. That would just carry through the summer. It was some feedback we got from employees was a more relaxed dress code when available, and so that was the change that was made, but I'll make sure to follow up with the actual policy so you can take a look.
Cool. And you said the next steps was to bring it in front of the unions, and who else did you say?
Yeah, the unions are the next step. So once we provide them to the unions and allow them a couple of weeks to take a look and provide any feedback that they have, then we can incorporate all those changes, and then it would be up to the city manager to sign them and implement them if he'd like.
Okay. The identification cards. It seems like it would be pricey to have expiration dates on them, and I work at the health department, and I use badges for entry, and so we don't talk about expirations, but we like, is that a costly endeavor? Should they be expired, or?
Yeah, that's a good point, and definitely something to think about. I know that we're exploring some ideas of possibly having those badge entry or access as well, and maybe that would kind of make the need for expiration dates obsolete, because you can just turn them off when. So
Yeah, turn
that's
the
a good point.
off. I was reading your the work from home policy, alternative work site. I'm not sure it's called. Maybe remote work conduct.
Yes.
Okay, one of the parts mentioned you can't be sleeveless, and some of our, particularly female attire, you know, we do wear sleeveless professionally. We can wear our arms out, and I'm sure, you know, not to be disclusive of anybody else, but I thought that was interesting if that's, you know, needed.
Yeah, that's good input. I will take a look at that as well.
And then the music and the TV, has that been a problem, or?
No, it's not been a problem. It wasn't included because we've had an issue with it. It was just part of the template as a general, you know, keeping your workstation at your home similar to how you would keep it in the office, free of distractions.
I hear that. I listen to music at work and at home, for example. And then, you know, I work on site 2 days a week, and so the other days I haven't found, you know, just in my perspective, like issues with music and TV so much. I did appreciate the smoking one. I swear I saw someone smoking during a virtual meeting. It was kind of like, oh, can we do that? But anyway, one other question just for now, and then I'll pass to someone else. The cell phone update, it had an enforcement at the bottom, like, and so I didn't see that enforcement in the other policies, or did I miss it? But it seemed like real strict, like.
Yeah, that's good to know. it doesn't always mention that in the policies and enforcement specifically. Of course, violation of city policy can always result in some sort of discipline. But I can take a look at that one a little bit more closely and see if it's necessary.
And just one final thing before I pass. I feel like sexual harassment should be its own policy.
Okay.
And so I know it's put in with the harassment and the discrimination. And I think that people benefit from conversations about what's appropriate to even say to someone or not. Like, is it appropriate to comment on a woman's physical appearance, for example? Or is that unnecessary in the workplace? Or where do we draw, how can people be clearer on drawing those lines so they're not crossing borders and also the recipient isn't feeling uncomfortable?
Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. I'll just note that. But thanks for bringing up the remote work conduct policy, because I must have missed that last bullet. I'm not a big fan of dress codes, period. I will say that the only time I was ever sent home when I was in high school is because I violated the dress code and had a T-shirt on instead of a collar shirt underneath my sweater. So I'm really more inclined towards sort of a general prohibitions or a suggestion that you use what might be business casual or something like that. And I'll just note again also that I've been at Myers and watched people go down the aisle wearing their pajama bottoms. So they wear it outside the house now. So that provision, and I would note that the bottoms wouldn't show up on the Zoom meeting anyway. But I think a gentler approach towards this is a better approach, personally.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on this dress code and leave it to you all, but Mary Barra, GM, said dress appropriately. It's 2 words is their dress policy, and it's had a positive impact on culture, but then that depends on your managers to ensure that people are. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, I want to preface my comments to you by saying I'm incredibly suspicious of templates. And given that we are have a multiplicity of public employees in this town, I'm curious as to whether those templates could be used. But first of all, just going to the remote work conduct policy, at the end of your first paragraph, you have a typographical, it's working form instead of working from. And then talking about dress codes, this makes me really nervous because I lost a significant case some years ago about dress codes. So I realize you conferred with the city attorney, but I'm very leery of creating dress codes. And I think it's still one of the main cases is Cornell versus Sparrow Hospital, which is a Michigan Supreme Court case, which I lost. And so I just would ask that we check that, because like so many other things, if the standard is not clear, then that creates a whole lot of problems, I think. And then stepping back from this, you have this City of East Lansing, Michigan personnel rules, which I take to be for non-union folks. Is that
That's correct, yes.
And I've noticed this before, but in the first section of that, at the end of the first section, it says this personnel policy. I actually think somebody needs to go through this. I suspect that this has morphed through 30 years and has never really been read very carefully to make sure it's precise in terms of the reference. So then, going from that to your other, what I'll call your general policies, I guess I'm curious as to what the concept here is, so for instance, talking about the social media policy. Well, I assume that applies to everybody, union and non-union?
Yes.
Okay, so is there some location for policies that apply to everybody as opposed to just non-union people?
They are available on the website, on the Human Resources page of the website, and then those are the policies that we go over with new hires on their first day as
Okay.
well, the ones that apply to everybody.
Well, I think it's unfair to employees not to have a compendium of some kind specifically applicable to union and non-union employees, and maybe combine them all in one and divide it so it's more cohesive. When I've gone and looked at personnel policies in the city of East Lansing, I've thought it was an extremely confusing hodgepodge, and I think we ought to take the opportunity right now to organize those in a way that makes sense. And then talking about the social media policy, what was your template for this?
That was a template from SHRM, Society for Human Resources Management.
Well, time through it, well, just doesn't prohibit labeling or slant somebody, which I think it should. You have the word malicious in here, but that's not an effective word in terms of creating that standard. And then I have no idea why we're talking about something like honesty and accuracy are essential when posting information or news. Well, how would we even enforce that? I mean, so, and then you go down to using social media at work. I don't know any time when we'd ever allow anybody to use their social media at work, so I would think that would just be a one sentence saying it's prohibited. And then I just think some of this language is incredibly vague, and I just think maybe my suggestion would be as we check some other templates on stuff like this, because I think this is all just kind of mushy, to be honest with you. And the use of social media by employees, I think, can be limited and should be limited within constitutional confines. And then, so I don't take up the whole night, employee conduct and work rules policy. So now, is that another one of these situations where that applies to everybody, union or non-union?
Yes.
Okay, so it just seems to me that that ought to be made absolutely clear, and it's not now currently. And I respectfully disagree with Councilwoman Watson about having sexual harassment be a separate category, because I actually think those numerous categories are consistent legally. But it seems to me, for instance, when you talk about procedures, that unless I missed it, there's no specific prohibition under the procedures of violating the social media policy. And I realize that, I mean, what's happened here is through 35 years, we've adopted policies, and they exist or are nested in your website, but the reality is, when you start talking about employee conduct and work rules, the rules that in the end can result in termination, up to and including termination, I think should all be included there, itemized insofar as possible. And so social media is another one where I just think that that probably should be in there, and I suspect that with a better definition of illegal harassment for gender or other reasons, that should be in there. And I would even suggest, in the context of the next discussion we're going to have, that we might be able to build into that section acts of discrimination towards the public, et cetera. So thank you for your work on this, but I have some very significant concerns about doing this, and I don't want to do it willy-nilly, and I want to come out with a work product that in the end has everything in one place, so all of our employees and all of our constituents can go to a certain spot, and if they have a complaint about an employee, they can see exactly what the complaint, what the employee may or may not have done. And I want the employees to be able to look at one site instead of having to search all over the website. So maybe at some point I can get together with the city manager and go through some of this other stuff. Okay, other discussion?
I wanted to say I appreciated the pregnant workers policy, and I think it would be helpful if some of the policies have a revisit date, and so maybe some of them are more common and can be pushed out maybe, or maybe they should standardly all have a revision date, but like we've got our policy team like back at work, and we're trying to get to a place of 1 year review, and I'm not saying, that would be necessary. And I saw the FMLA policy as a reiteration so that people are clear, like it's not like you've altered, anything. I appreciate that you're bringing in the unions because it impacts them. And the last thing, I'm worried about, just back to the social media, the harm, what's the harm of multitasking, and I've seen people eat in in-person meetings, and so this one, talks about not eating during a virtual meeting, or the muting yourself. People might be in a smaller meeting space where it makes sense that they just remain unmuted. So it seems, I guess it feels a little strict.
Yeah.
Then the other thing, Mr. City Manager, that I'm concerned all the way through here is on some of these policies, without itemizing them, that authorize a director to essentially allow a dispensation to do this, that, or the other thing. And I'm just wondering, from a workforce standpoint, whether that's the bureaucratic setup we want, and whether the city manager should be the final arbiter. But the other more concerning thing about that is I don't see any indication that there's any kind of setup for a written permission. So I guess I'm not real happy about directors verbally approving something, if only to protect the director. If there's some kind of dispute about, well, did so-and-so allow me to do that or not allow me to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems to me we could have some sort of a form or something like that for those kinds of situations at the very least. But I would ask you as city manager to take a look at that in terms of how you really want those processes to work. So anything else for tonight? Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks for your work on
Yep,
this.
thank you.
Okay, 6.5, discussion of pretextual stops request from the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission. Mr. City Manager.
Actually, I'll defer to Councilmember Meadows, who asked that this item be put on your agenda for further discussion this evening.
And I'll defer to staff of the LPOC because this was a specific request of the members of that commission to have a response of some kind with regard to this, and we need to have a discussion of it in order to do it. So if you would take it, and then I'd probably have some questions from the police department as to how they're doing this at this point in time.
Good. Thank you, Councilmember Meadows. Elaine Hardy, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and the staff liaison to the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight. There are 2 members of the commission present here. The item before you, just to give you some background, the LEPOC provided a request to council, I believe it was in April, via a memo to ask the council to look at codifying language regarding pretextual stops. The background in that document should be and is in your council packet. And if you would just permit me some liberty to just maybe bring council up to speed on it. The vice chair of LEPOC spoke during public comment about the request and hoping that language could be codified. And I do want to have the chairperson come up and make comments after I kind of give some brief background. So the LEPOC referenced that this council, former council passed a resolution in 2020 declaring racism a public health crisis. And in light of that resolution, there were some items that were called out as a part of the background for this request for codified language. And one of the, a couple of the tenets of that resolution indicated that the council would work with staff and leadership to identify specific activities to further enhance diversity and to ensure anti-racism principles across the city of East Lansing's leadership, staffing, and contracting, and then to promote equity through our policies approved by the East Lansing City Council and enhance educational efforts aimed at understanding and addressing and dismantling racism and how it affects the delivery of human and social services, economic development, and public safety. And so they have further informed council that on July 6th of 2023 that the city of Ann Arbor passed an ordinance referred to as the Driving Equity Ordinance. This ordinance codified the prohibition of traffic stops for purely pretextual reasons. And again, the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight is asking that you do the same. They did, in their background information, call out that the police department has a reduced interest policy where they have, when there's certain non-public safety violations that occur in motor vehicles, such as items hanging from the windshield, or from the rear view mirror, windshield, loud exhaust, that those are reduced interest to the police. So the motion that the LEPOC passed at their April meeting asked that the city council codify language that would include that no law enforcement officer employed by the city of East Lansing Police Department shall stop or detain an operator or occupant of a motor vehicle based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender, age, cultural group, or disability. A law enforcement officer employed by the city of East Lansing Police Department shall not stop or detain the operator or occupant of a motor vehicle based solely on one or any of the following offenses: cracked or chipped windshield, loud exhaust, tinted windows, objects hanging from rearview mirror, cracked or broken, burned out tail lamp where at least one tail lamp remains functional and properly illuminated, registration plate violations regarding plate height or attachment, location of registration sticker, peeling registration sticker, location of temporary paper registration plate so long as it remains visible from the rear of the vehicle, defective equipment, other non-safety violations, registration tags expired less than 90 days. The LEPOC, the East Lansing Independent Oversight Commission, understands that developing language to codify an ordinance or a new law will take some time in planning, and that they request that council take up this matter in consideration within 90 days. And so I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the LEPOC for questions, and I'm going to go sit down.
Do I got to get up there? Y'all want me to say something, or you have questions?
No, I don't. It's up to you how you want to.
I would just echo everything that was said. I think one of the things that LEPOC has always had interest in since the founding is traffic stops. We have so much data that's constantly changing, and we know that East Lansing is a transit community, and a lot of people come through here and don't necessarily live here. But I also think that it's important to note that a lot of states and local municipalities are starting to move towards this place, sort of decreasing the responsibility of what police need to be doing for traffic stops. I think one of the ones Cav cited was Philadelphia, which was one of the first major cities to pass a ban on, or limiting, I should say, I hate the word banned, limiting these type of traffic stops. I think we really should just call it driving equity. I think when we look at statistics, we know who are the cars that generally have the broken tail lights or have expired registrations. So we know who those members of the communities are, and it's important that we give them a fair chance instead of piling on top of what is already problematic for them, which is their car. more fines and tickets and things that take away from work and all those things. I think that you'll find that several states are passing statewide laws that severely limit this. I think you can see that this comes out of just a lot of major or notable cases that we've seen in the public where someone has died has come from a pretextual stop. You know, Minnesota, you know, they right up there at #1 with the most cases, most notable cases, I should say. And you know, we can look right here at Michigan to see that there has been stops that have led to death, not necessarily a pretextual stop. But from my point of view, I think the less minuscule reasons the police can pull over people further limit, I don't want to say limit, but decreases their workload maybe, but it also allows the community to not feel like they're being nitpicked by the police. I think it's especially for a community that sees a lot of traffic going through and not necessarily living here. And so I think that's really where this came out of, is just this desire to create a space where everybody feels welcome in East Lansing and not necessarily have to worry about if their car meets the standard for being in East Lansing. I remember when I first moved here, I had a 200 Chrysler, and I remember my roommate telling me, you need to get an updated car because this is East Lansing and folks don't drive cars that as old as yours. So, you know, those type of things I think we need to mitigate. But also we know that when folks get these tickets, it just creates a more financial burden, and those things never get fixed. And I mean, we see our state is changing the way things impacts people because of financial obligations. So I prefer to call this driving equity than a pretextual stop, but I think this is a step in the right direction.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Connerly? Thanks for coming, sir. Appreciate it. Okay. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I want to hear from the police
Chief, you
department.
want to come up?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm going to read a piece that comes right from our policy for our traffic enforcement. ELPD, in line with its commitment to public safety, encourages and supports traffic enforcement. This enforcement aimed at providing a safer environment for the citizens of the city of East Lansing and the motoring public. Providing a safer environment for the city of East Lansing residents and a motoring public is a duty of every officer, regardless of their specific assignment. Every uniform officer is expected to enforce the Uniform Traffic Code, City of East Lansing ordinances, and state law. This includes appropriate enforcement when observing a motor vehicle code law violation. Department members assigned to uniform patrol functions will emphasize the enforcement of violations that contribute to traffic accidents and will consider the hours and locations where traffic accidents tend to occur. Members will take direct enforcement action on request and random action when appropriate. Members shall maintain high visibility while working in general enforcement, especially in areas where traffic accidents frequently occur. So as part of an officer's oath of office, one of the things that we have to recite when a judge gives us our oath is that we will enforce the laws and ordinances of the city of East Lansing, as well as the state of Michigan and the Constitution of the United States. The Uniform Traffic Code, which the city has adopted, is a state uniform traffic code. So we enforce all of those. And I agree, we need to look at the Uniform Traffic Code in a sense of what are we doing to concentrate on those specific laws that we should make sure that we are enforcing. So what we try to do is to target hotspots where crime and mobile offenders are likely to concentrate, or where drunk drivers are likely to consume alcohol beverages before driving drunk. So having the ability to enforce both moving and non-moving violation is vital to combating drunk driving. In 2020, MAD reported that Over 11,000 people died in alcohol-impaired driving deaths, which was a 14% increase from 2019. Some of those are due to defective equipment and other non-moving violations. It's essential to recognize that without an traffic, the number skyrocket. With the road traffic 13 reality under critical role in maintaining and preventing harm to lives. And just to give you context, in 2023, ELPD, or the City of East Lansing, reported a record number of traffic crashes involving death in 7. So as we've changed the policy to reflect where we are primarily looking at the Uniform Traffic Code and the laws and ordinances that are adopted through that, we do have a less interest in those minor traffic violations or non-moving violations. But they are still important because some of those violations also make vehicles on the road unsafe to drive, as well as for people to be on the road behind them or in front of them. So it's not just about the driver, it's also about the other people that are on the road at the same time.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Then specifically, I'm looking at the Ann Arbor ordinance right now. It doesn't prohibit, a ticket based on some of these items, but it does set a standard which must be met in order to do so. And it doesn't talk about it being a secondary violation. So I'm not sure what we do here, and I'd like to hear a little bit more, but when I look at except where an officer reasonably believes, based on articulable facts, that the violation is of a nature or magnitude that poses an immediate risk of harm, I guess I think that's a very high standard. If it just said risk of harm, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with it, frankly, because I think that's easier. I wouldn't say that makes it easier to write the ticket, but it does, immediate means to me, like in the next moment, somebody's going to be, in trouble. So the cracked or chipped windshield, I'll just admit for the record here that when I bought my 2019 Jeep, about 2 weeks after I got it, a rock chipped my windshield. So I've had a chipped windshield ever since. I guess I could be stopped and ticketed with regard to it.
You haven't been.
And the lot of exhaust, I note that, we've had a lot of complaints, especially at the doors when we were campaigning last year, about the noise in the neighborhoods, largely from loud exhaust. So I don't know how to deal with that, because I don't think it's ever going to be something that's a risk of harm to a person, unless maybe your ears could be harmed. The tinted windows, I guess I've never understood that, because people have tinted windows and I thought they were prohibited, so I don't know what those things do, but I don't see people get pulled over for it either. So I want to make sure that we don't start doing that. The object hanging from the rearview mirror, I want that gone. I can't believe it's still in the law to begin with. I think that half the cars that you look into have something hanging from the rearview mirror. But a cracked, broken, or burned out tail light, and the restriction here is where at least one tail light remains functional and properly illuminated. I do think there might be a safety issue with regard to that. The registration plate lighting violations, I think I realize that we're supposed to be able to visibly take a look at a license plate as it drives by. I don't consider that to be something that you'd want to spend a half hour writing a ticket and then maybe end up in a courtroom for 3 hours waiting to be called as a witness. I can't imagine a police officer writing that ticket. Registration plate violations regarding plate height or attachment, no idea why that's in. I mean, if somebody can tell me why that should be a violation of the law, other than somebody talking to somebody and say, hey, you know, you need to fix that because nobody can tell what's going on with it. Or the location of the registration sticker. These are all in the Ann Arbor ordinance. And presumably, we can enforce these as well. And the location of a temporary or paper registration plate. Generally, that's put on at the dealers when you're getting your car. And, you know, why you should get smacked for it is a little beyond me. I mean, write a ticket on the dealership. Don't write a ticket on the driver. So what I'm really looking for from the police department is how could we craft something that makes sure that we aren't stopping people solely for this reason. I don't want to, if there's a different reason to stop somebody and they also have some of this stuff, you know, I'm a little ambiguous on that in terms of how I would want to approach that. But I don't think it's outside the pale for us as a city to reflect this Ann Arbor ordinance in the same way. It doesn't prohibit it. It sets a standard for actually writing those tickets. And I think that's a fair way for us to approach this. And then, so I'd like to get some input from the police department with regard to this. Obviously, ELIPOC has already taken a look at this and made a recommendation. And they made a specific reference to the Ann Arbor ordinance. And usually Ann Arbor follows us, not the other way around, but I want to point out that, you know, this doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
Go ahead, Dana.
Director Hardy, did you have something that are you good? No. I just saw you moved. Yeah, you just wait, okay. Has anyone on council been pulled over in the city of East Lansing for these reasons?
No, but I've represented numerous clients in the last 40 years that have been pulled over for these reasons.
Guess what? I have. I have. So I'm black, and I've known that if my tags were expired, even if it was within 30 days out, I would get pulled over by the City of East Lansing Police. I do have tinted windows. I like my tinted windows. I think it's, for me, it's a privacy thing. It looks good on the cars, but they do tell you when you tint your windows what the rules are as far as, you know, how deep the tinting is going to go. But like you were saying, Councilmember Meadows, this is something that City of Ann Arbor does. And also, you know, I've been a part of listening to the conversations that ELIPOC has had around this. And our disparities are still seen within policing. And so sometimes the changes that need to happen that we can support happening are things like this. So I think it sounded like, if I were to sum it up, that having these in police ability to use has been used inappropriately. And if we've figured out maybe other reasons why it should be in here, I am in support of how do we make the change, and I want to implement the changes.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, and this may, I'm sure, been covered in prior commission meetings, but how would you describe a pretextual stop, and then how would you, our chair of ELIPOC, describe a pretextual stop?
Are you asking me?
Both, yeah, I want to hear both persons' definition of that.
I think.
Can you step up to the microphone?
No, we
mind?
can hear you.
Oh.
There's just a few of us here, but you know, it feels informal.
I think for me, a pretextual stop is just a stop that, I think for me, if we've had so many discussions about this, and I have to dig deep to my own personal thinking because I have so many experiences, even as a teacher, who had students, parents pulled over for pretextual reasons. But when I think of a pretextual stop, it's just a stop that the police is pulling people over that makes money for the city. It's a fine that somebody has to pay for something that is minuscule that necessarily, for my opinion, didn't need to be put. They wasn't causing the harm. It was not causing the harm to anyone in the area specifically. I think generally cities use those, and in my personal belief, they came about just as a financial way for cities to make money. I think I sit on the Racial Equity Task Force, and we often talk about these in the Criminal Justice Committee, where we talk about just how much courts and cities pack their budgets with fines and fees that disproportionately affect people who will not ever be able to pay them, because if they did, they probably would have got their broken tail light fixed, or they probably would have gotten their cracked windshield fixed, or a lot of those things. I do not, me personally, and I think members of the committee, do not believe that a pretextual stop in any way, shape, or form prohibits the police from protecting or saving the community from anything. I don't think that pulling someone over for speeding, you should just pull them over for speeding. You know, it's not no one's fault that maybe you didn't have your radar gun out and you can tell that they were speeding, and so then you go to a different reason to pull them over. I think that we need to start, I won't say that it's not a legitimate reason, but I think that it's the source of a lot of conflict and culturally mistrust. Speaking as a person who grew up in the city of Detroit, and I can tell you about 80% of the people in Detroit got one of those violations going on with their car, and watching people be pulled over from them, and watching my own student, be traumatized because her mom was pulled over for a pretextual reason right here outside of the post office on Abbey Road. And the only reason to pull over has something to do with the license plate was hanging and they couldn't see the sticker, and then it turns into people standing on the curb, and a big mischief, and me as a teacher having to go pick this kid up and bring them to school, and then they cried my whole classroom day, and this is right here in East Lansing, and they don't live here. So I believe it's just it served this purpose maybe as a financial way. But I think that in the times where equity is a big focus, it's not equitable to keep piling fees and fines on top of people who we know cannot afford to pay them, or they can't afford to fix their car. But I also, something that the chief said, which is in these areas where there's high traffic issues, I feel like there's so much technology nowadays that can be used to do that, to limit what I think is interactions that will go wrong. I think they will. They almost certainly always go wrong, because it's a heightened emotional moment to be told you're getting pulled over because your tail light didn't work and you lost your job yesterday. And so I feel like these lead to a lot of those interactions that we don't want to be seeing, if that makes sense. And I think that is really the consensus of LEPOC. But I don't want to speak for all of them, but I know that has always been the underlying conversation.
Okay. Chief,
I think what I heard there was in reference to fines. So the police department doesn't enforce on fines.
I think we want, I'm not interested in you reacting to the prior speaker. Right. What I'm interested now is Mayor Pro Tem's question to you, which is, how would you define a pretextual stop?
I would define a pretextual stop as not having a basis of a violation before you make that stop. That's what I would call a pretextual stop.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, let me just make a suggestion to the council here, because I'm a little confused. I didn't get a chance to read the entire Ann Arbor ordinance. I apologize for that. But in this submission we have, at the top of the second page of the submission, bless you.
Thank you.
It has a quote from, I guess, from policies, and I've always been somewhat confused about the police department policies. So let me suggest to for the consideration of the council. I would like to ask the city manager to direct a memorandum to us, the council, outlining the different police policies. I'm well aware of the fact that the commission has looked at some of these, but outlining the police policies that impact on this, also including the City of Ann Arbor statute, and also with the assistance of the city attorney giving us advice about what the current state of the law is with regard to stops based on protected classes. Because my view of this historically is that it is right now illegal in this city and in this state to stop anybody or detain anybody in a motor vehicle based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, socioeconomic status, age, cultural group, or disability. I think that's just against the law. And we have this other thing about stops in the law called probable cause. And many times there isn't probable cause in these situations. I guess the other thing I'd be interested in seeing is information with regard to the financial, the data with regard to the money that the city has made, quote unquote, based on the stops itemized in page 2 of the memo that we received on this over a period of time, both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I'm just curious about what that data actually indicates. And then can I just, yeah, we'll get there. And then I would just ask that once you've prepared that memorandum, you get it back to the council for the council's further consideration of whether in fact it wants to move ahead to somehow resolve these ordinances. And let me just say, parenthetically, Chief, I understand the point of view here, and there are in fact state statutes that are being enforced here, or we incorporate state statutes in our East Lansing Code of Ordinances. And so I guess another element, Mr. City Manager, if I'm not totally confusing you, is what right do we have to not adopt or incorporate state motor vehicle code provisions in our local city ordinances? My experience is that we've incorporated them pretty much wholesale. So I would just suggest that as a way to move forward with the council, but Mr. Altman? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I would just wanted another data point I'd be interested in. I know it was referenced in the vice chair's public comment earlier in terms of the percentage of stops. I believe it was 65% white, and then the remaining people of color, if I'm recalling the public comment correctly. And we're a transient community. I'm curious, comparables in a similar way. I don't know if LEPAC's already taken a look at that, but I'm just, from a data point, would be interested in that.
So I guess where I'm headed, Mr. Bellman, on this is I'd like to have some work product from you with the cooperation of the police department and the commission, itemizing those things so the city council can have more discussion and potentially action in terms of instructing the city attorney to prepare some sort of change in the ordinances. I'm not saying I'd support that, but I want to see the background of that. And I've always been somewhat confused by the police, quote, policies, end quote. And I realize you all have looked at the policies more than I have, so. Yes, sir.
Just briefly, I wanted to address a couple of the issues on the list. And I wonder if I could ask the chief for his perspective on tinted windows as it relates to officer safety. And more generally, the officer being able to do what they need to do.
So yes, there is a concern with officer safety with tinted windows when you're not able to see what's inside. Now, the practice usually is to ask people to roll their windows down, so then you can be able to view at least inside or who's all inside, but that doesn't always happen. So again, it's a, you know, when you're talking with the person, is there going to be that consent to roll their windows down or not? You know, when we can see inside a vehicle, there's other, you know, we can get other probable cause depending on what's inside the vehicle, to either have the driver step out of the car or place them under arrest. So tinted windows is, you know, a safety concern for public safety. I couldn't even tell you numbers of even prior to 2020 of how many traffic stops we made strictly for tinted windows.
With the new state legislation concerning distracted driving, you basically can't touch your cell phone.
Correct.
I had a guy whiz by me today, tinted windows, couldn't see in the car except when the light was shining through, and he was holding his head, you know, cell phone right there. So how often do you make stops for distracted driving and cell phone use based on just what you see in the car? And do tinted windows interfere with that?
We have.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you the numbers offhand, but.
All right, thank you. So I have a big concern about putting tinted windows on this list for the reasons that the chief articulated. I think it absolutely is a public safety issue if you can't see into somebody's car to see that they're using their cell phone while they're driving. I think that's a big problem. I think it interferes with communication between drivers as well, and between pedestrians and drivers. I have noticed this multiple times, that I can't see where a driver's looking. And there's a lot of communication that happens between drivers that I think we're discounting if we think that tinted windows are okay. And while we're telling anecdotes, so we bought a used car that had tinted windows all the way around, came from Florida. The person, previous owner, had a prescription. But we understood that the tint on the windshield and the side windows on the front doors was not legal in Michigan, so we had them removed because that's what you do. So I don't think that tinted windows should be on this list. I think it absolutely is a safety issue. I also think that loud exhaust is a public health issue, not to mention a public safety issue. If you get people startled by loud exhaust, that's not a good thing. And we've heard a lot from speakers from the podium. We've got complaints via email that loud exhaust is absolutely an issue and should not be something that we should ignore. And I think that a taillight out is a problem, because if you're following a single light, well, that's a motorcycle. If you're following two lights, well, that's a car. They're different widths. So that the chief referred earlier to the issue of it's not just a particular driver, it's the other people on the road. And I think a taillight out contributes to safety issues. So those are just the three things on the list that I wanted to draw some attention to.
Well, are you saying that you don't want the city manager to prepare a...
I am not saying that at all. I'm
Okay.
taking the opportunity, the conversation, to add some
Okay.
context.
Well, I mean, I assume we can sort all those things out when we have something that's really in front of us. So that's where I was trying to go. Ms. Watson?
Tinted windows are legal, is that correct?
Are legal?
Yeah,
Certain tint.
right.
So there is a
my-
fraction.
yeah,
There is
that
a
was my
fraction,
question.
yes.
They-
If you get
they
past
are-
a fraction, the
Yeah.
certain fraction, then it is illegal.
Yeah, but it is legal to have
Yes.
tinted windows.
Yes. Up to a certain fraction.
Right. Motorcycles are, when they leave, like I've got a motorcyclist two houses down.
Mm-hmm.
When they leave, I hear them. When they pull up, I hear them. Is that exhaust or is that not exhaust?
When you talk about loud exhaust or defective equipment is what it really is. Defective equipment would be that there's something wrong with that equipment in general. So right now, there's a House bill that's going through that talks about altering the exhaust. So if that motorcycle alters their exhaust, then it would be in violation of that law. But if it's equipment, let's say there's a hole in the side of it, or somehow the exhaust just isn't funneling out and the noise is not being kind of baffled in, then that would be a defective equipment. But when when motorcycles or cars are manufactured in a certain way and then come off the line, presumably, I would say that that is not defective equipment. But if a motorcyclist goes in front of your house and just revs and revs and revs, I would say that's a noise violation.
That's a loud exhaust.
I would say it's a noise violation.
All right. And I know that we continue to want to work on the noise ordinance. And so hopefully, even if loud exhausts stayed on the list, we're still going to hopefully keep having discussions and come to a better place regarding the noise ordinances. I know you've talked, Chief previously had talked about the decibel machines or something like that, so that can actually test the loudness and if it's,
Yes.
All right. Oh, and I wanted to add to what Mayor said, and I know that you landed at revenues on tickets. And if it's possible, City Manager, I want to back that up a little bit and get information on the pullovers on these, and then the tickets that are distributed and the fees, and then, also the revenue, because revenue implies that they paid it. And so I would like to follow the history further back.
Like pullovers, you mean stops, right? Stops?
Yeah.
And some of those defective equipment violations may not have, even though they received a ticket, may never got to a fine because a lot of them are waivable. So if they are waivable.
Correctable. You can correct them.
Or correctable. If they fix it, there's no fine. That's it. Okay.
All right, thank you.
And that was going to be my question, because I want to, when you talk about defective equipment, loud exhaust, you say defective equipment. Cracked or chipped windshield, defective equipment. So going through this list, I would be interested in knowing what are considered to be a defective equipment here, because that does result in a fix it or get fined type of ticket, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so but the person who gets the ticket has to show up in court with the proof they got it corrected, and then it's dismissed?
They show up to a police department, any police department in the state of Michigan, and an officer can sign off on the back of it after they view it.
Okay. And then just one note regarding the enforcement of the Uniform Traffic Code. East Lansing for many years disregarded the state law with regard to marijuana possession by having its own small fine for small parts of marijuana possession. So I think it is perfectly capable for us to alter or have our own local ordinances and ask our police officers only to write our local ordinance. So when we get to this and the proposal or the information provided by Mr. Bellman, I think we need to think of it in those terms.
Okay, anything more for tonight? Are we where we want to be? Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Thanks for coming. Thank you all. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Meadows, seconded by Altman. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously.